Hello everybody, welcome to your video notes on 8.3 Extends. We're talking about Coulomb's law, but with qualitative prediction. So qualitative meaning not very much math. Okay, so as a reminder, the way that this is going to work is you're always going to get something that says, hey, is the distance, if the distance increases by this much, how much is the force going to change by? If you change the charge, how's that going to affect the force and by how much? So as a reminder, charge is directly proportional to electrostatic force. Meaning, if Q goes up, that means that the force is going to go up by the same amount, or by the same factor, let's say. Okay? But distance is inversely or indirectly related. So, distance and force are inversely or indirectly proportional. Which means that if R goes up, that means F is going to go down by a factor of R squared. Okay, and the reverse would be true for each of these. So if R would go down, that means force would go up, and then if Q would go down, F would also go down. Okay, so let's get into what I'm talking about here. So what happens to the force if let's do a different color just because we're fancy. So what happens to the force if distance is tripled? Well, we do know that, if we have this and then this, it makes sense that the force is going to be weaker further out. Okay, so we know that the force will decrease. It's going to decrease, but so if the distance is tripled, that's like multiplying by 3. The force will decrease not by a factor of 3, but by a factor of 3 squared. So we know that it's going to be 3 squared, which would be by 9 times. So it's going to decrease by a factor of, if I multiply by 9, if I said times 9, that would mean increase. So we can't do times 9. Instead, we're going to say the factor of 1/9. Okay? And it makes sense because R squared is on the bottom. So that would be the answer to this one. Then we'd have, so let's do another example. What happens to the force if, so we did this one, let's do another one. The charge is tripled this time. Okay, so what happens if we triple the charge? Well, if there's more charge, there's going to be more force, but it's going to be by the same factor. Okay, because these charges are just that. They're not squared, they're not square rooted or anything. So we know that it's going to increase. So force will increase by a factor of 3. That's it. Hey, that's not so hard, is it? Let's do a few more. Okay, so let's do the opposite now. So let's do distance is reduced by a quarter. So what's going to happen to the force if I reduce the distance by a factor of a quarter? So the distance is going to be smaller. So instead of this, we're going to have this. So we know that the force has to be greater, right? So distance went down, force has to go up because they're indirectly related. But it's going to be by a factor of r squared. So the distance is going to decrease. So that means force will increase by a factor of not 4, but 4 squared, so 16. Force will increase by a factor of 16. Okay, and then I've got one last example. So charge is reduced now by a factor of 4. Charge and force are directly related, so they're going to do the same thing. So if the charge is reduced, the force will also decrease by a factor of 4. That's it. Not very hard extends level on this one. Thanks for listening.